Good afternoon. We are going to talk about something a little different than what you've been hearing about earlier today. So, as mentioned, my name's Robin. I'm the head of our retail practice at Huge. I grew up in the retail space. So, by way of background, I spent 8 years at Ralph Lauren. I was part of the team that built the Nautica brand back in the mid-90s. I always feel so old saying that. And did some other things and eventually left Donna Karan in 2000 and went into a different side of the business. But I did everything from running stores. I actually started off selling suits at Apollo stores, kind of where I got hooked with the discount. In any event, I work at Huge now, my first gig at an agency, which is really interesting, part of our strategy consulting group. And I work with a lot of retailers who are thinking about how does their business model change given what we see going on in the industry today. So in any event, what I'm going to talk about today in the time that we have, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we see happening in the retail landscape. I'll do a quick introduction about Huge, in case some of you don't know who we are, and then we'll cover a lot of different ground. I will switch from the landscape to some of the areas that we're focusing on that we think is really interesting, and then the more exciting bit for me is kind of what's next in retail, given what we see happening with Amazon and consumer technology, et cetera. So that's kind of the journey we're going to go on. It's really going to cover a lot of different aspects. So, a little bit about Huge, just by show of hands. Who here has heard of Huge? Okay, maybe a third of the group. I had actually never heard of Huge before joining the company. But I love what we do, and as the slide says, we make things people love. And that covers a lot of different ground. We'll talk about that in a minute. What you're seeing is some representative work from clients, everything in the top left of working with SK2, which is a P&G brand. How do you redefine the customer experience, the counter experience for beauty in the department store, to creating store associate tools with Lowe's and working with Nike to think about how do you do the sneaker drop differently when you've got hundreds of people lining up around the block and you've got the equivalent of scalpers who really don't care about the product, but they're going to buy it and resell it. So a lot of interesting things that we get involved with. Specifically, the heritage of the company, we started with the principle of everything starts with the user, which really seems intuitive today, but when we started about 13, 14 years ago, that was actually really radically different at that time. So it involves everything from looking at physical design, digital properties, coming up with what is that user experience. And what's really interesting, when I interviewed for the job at Huge, in the strategy group, I asked our CEO, why are companies coming to an agency for strategy consulting work? Which just really was surprising to me. And the answer is that so many companies are going through transformation today, and they are anchoring those strategies around the user experience. And that's what gets us into the space where we are today. This is a good snapshot of how we think about the work that we do in terms of looking at products and platforms, whether it's your digital assets, what's going on in stores, places and spaces. So how do we rethink user journeys in stores? How do we connect the in-store experience with online? And lastly, communications and campaigns. So the traditional agency type work, media, PR, marketing, how do we launch brands into the marketplace, et cetera. So it's a really exciting time to be in this space. It's an exciting time to be in retail in particular. Just a few, boy, this is slow. A few examples of some of the brands and companies we work with. You might recognize a few of those. That client list really spans a lot of different types of activities. We've got another one here specifically where we focus in retail. You'll recognize some of those. And that's generally the space that I play in with inside the firm. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on. From my days in retail, as I was thinking about putting this presentation together, when I joined Nautica, I was the first buyer to get a PC. Think about that. We were using green bar paper, once again, feeling very old saying that, with a dot matrix printer, and part of my requirement was I'm not coming here unless I get a PC. We've come a long way, and we're really just starting to scratch the surface when we think about kind of what are the drivers that are having the biggest change in retail, and from my perspective, it's consumer technology. Because consumer technology is changing the way we behave, changing the way that we interact as a society. So, two very different companies. We hear news about them all the time. If you're in the room in your Sears, sorry for what's coming. But what do we hear, right? Are they doing anything innovative? All we're hearing is stores closing every couple weeks, and they're not reinventing themselves. But Walmart is. Is Walmart the new cool kid in retail? Like 10, 15 years ago, who was going to Walmart? To work, rather. Like, who wanted to go to Bentonville? Now you've got the founder, Andy Dunn of Bonobos, head of their e-commerce. You've got Jenny Fleiss, co-founder of Rent the Runway, who is running Jet Black. So they are attracting some incredible talent. They are completely reinventing themselves, and is a really interesting model for what's going on in retail today. I love this slide, right? So we think about different models that we see emerging in retail. Who here 5 years ago thought Best Buy was going out of business? I did. I was like, there's no way these guys are making it. I'm getting my 55-inch on Amazon. I'm getting it free shipping, no tax. And guess what? Their stock price has increased over 200% in the past 5 years. 200%. Think about that for a minute. And as I'm showing here in this example, they are now in partnership with Amazon, the very company we thought was going to put them out of business. Remember showrooming? That was going to be the death of them? It's not anymore. Like, now we're able to look at showrooming and get so much data from a user behavior perspective, it actually informs the way we think about merchandising in stores. This next one here, Lord & Taylor, guess where that image is taken from? Walmart's website. So here we've got a mass merchant who is dabbling in high fashion. The last one here, Diane von Furstenberg, and that's just one example. Pick your brand. They're all trying to go direct to consumer. Why? Because they want to own the customer relationship. Why is that? Because they want the data, right? And that's a whole new world of opportunity, because all of these brands, they've never had to manage the data before. All they were getting was sell-through data through their wholesale partners, which is the very thing that's killing department stores. So department stores need to reinvent themselves because the very brands that built them are now saying we're going to go direct to consumer. So we'll see a lot more changes coming in the department store world. The other big shift that we see happening is e-commerce. We're not surprised, but do you realize the scale of what's happening? So in the next 5 years, and this clock started last year, e-commerce sales will more than double than what it is today. Think about that. It will more than double. Where are those sales coming from? Are we doubling the population? Are we doubling the amount that we're spending? To a certain extent, we're increasing overall demand, but some of that demand is shifting from in-store, right? So that has a profound effect when we think about how do we engage customers, how do we create preference, how do we leverage the data that we have, all the data that we've been talking about this morning, customer lifetime value and next best action, all of those types of things. We need to put that in service of figuring out how do we create user preference for our brand. And so Coming out of all of that, the biggest thing that we see when we're working with clients is a new mandate in terms of their overall business strategy. Experience matters, right? Product is ubiquitous. I can get product anywhere, anytime, and for the most part, most product is highly substitutable today, unless you're a niche brand. But if I want the khakis, I could go to J. Crew, I can go to Gap, I can go to whomever. For the most part, it's the same. I might be brand loyal to a certain point, to a certain price point, but convenience and experience is ultimately what's going to drive my purchase decision. So the interesting thing when I talk with a lot of retailers and we look at their strategy, how do you engage consumers? How do you leverage the data that you have? One of the things that I always hear is, we've got an omni-channel strategy. Omni-channel is not a strategy. It is not an experience strategy. And so many retailers get that wrong. Omni-channel is about an attribution play. And think about the evolution of how we got to omni-channel. I remember that. I remember back in the day, in the very short past, when there were no systems for e-commerce. It was store 999 in our regular system, because there wasn't any special way to treat e-commerce or even direct catalog at that point in time. And then we went from store 999 to an official recognition that we need to manage this inventory differently, so it became multi-channel, right? Because it was stores and then it was something else, either catalog, direct, or internet in its early stages. And then we evolved to omni-channel as a result of social, mobile, all of these different touch points that we have with customers. And the focus has been on inventory management, channel distribution. How do I have visibility across all of those different channels of distribution? That's where omni-channel came from. And a lot of companies today make the mistake of thinking, if I synchronize that and I create the right touch points, that's an experience strategy, and it definitely is not. So, I hate the delay here. So at Huge, we talk about the user as the channel. And it seems somewhat simple and intuitive when you think about it, but it has a profound effect in terms of how retailers go about the operations in their business. When the user is the channel, everything in that organization is in service of the user. So we think about the way, and I won't go into the details of kind of the top-down approach of, I set my merchandise plan, my store plan, et cetera, and then we go execute. That's very different than saying, what's the experience I want my users to have? How are they going to engage with our brand? How do we differentiate along that user experience? And then everything else ladders up to that. So my store operations, my marketing initiatives, my merchandising plans, the way I think about merchandising products across those channels, all of those things now work in concert towards a user experience principle, which is very different than the way most retailers operate today, which is operationally driven. I have supply chain, I have merchandising, I need to get products in by this particular time, it's going to go into this part of the store, and the user journey is not the overarching theme that guides those operations. So when we talk about the user as the channel, I always throw this up there because it's hard to, or I should say, it's easy to lose perspective of what that means. And in particular, not only does it have to be contextual and anticipatory, and we could talk about all the different technologies that help you get there, but the point where some retailers miss is it needs to be human. And we work with a lot of retailers who think, I need to have technology, I need to have the mobile app or whatever it is. Sometimes the best experience is when you can't even see the technology. It is in the background, it's doing what it needs to do. It becomes almost this invisible OS, if you will, as part of that overall experience strategy. So, in thinking about the user as a channel, there are three things that we're going to talk about where we focus. There's a few more, but I think these are the more interesting ones. How do you create that engaging experience? So the 4 brands that we've picked here, they didn't reinvent their products, right? Warby Parker didn't reinvent glasses. Harper Wilde didn't reinvent the bra. What all these brands did is they reinvented the experience in terms of how we interact with the brand that sells those products, right? In terms of Casper, we can go and actually sleep on the mattress in store, schedule an appointment. You can do the glasses online. What better place than to get the right fitting for your shirt or bra than trying it on in-home? So they've changed the experience overall. The other part that we see that's prevalent and growing today is this notion of services. So who's heard of Nordstrom Local? Show of hands. There's like 4 or 5 people in the audience. So Nordstrom Local is a new test store. I shouldn't say new anymore, it's been out there, with no inventory. So think about that for a minute. Everything you know about retail changes when you go down this path, right? So they have a bar, you can get your nails done, have a cocktail while a stylist comes out with the products that you want to see. Earlier in the year, I was meeting with the head of customer experience at Nordstrom that actually heads up this initiative, and we got into a discussion of some of the challenges they were facing about, so what are the metrics? What are the key metrics that you're looking at in retail, right? It's labor productivity, it's sales per square foot metrics. So if I don't have inventory in the store, what am I going to base performance on? How do you measure experience as part of an overall strategy? So it's really interesting, and I'm assuming they figured it out because they're going to open up 2 more. So clearly that experiment's working. Who here's heard of Pet Coach? We've got 1. I'm sure you're going to win a prize. It's fabulous. We'll get it to you later. So Pet Coach is a new brand concept from Petco, right? We've all heard of Petco. So what happens in Pet Coach? I can get my dog walked, I can get veterinary services, I can self-wash my dog or have someone wash it for me. You get the idea. There's a whole bunch of services, and we're seeing that more and more with retailers. Why is this happening? Right? I can get product anywhere. So at the end of the day, it goes back to that experience. If I'm going to differentiate my brand, I need to stand for some higher level purpose in the marketplace. The third one we'll cover today is loyalty. And most loyalty programs that we use, they really suck. The exceptions, I will say, I'm a Starwood guy, which is now part of Marriott. That's a shame. And I'm a Delta guy, which I will stand here and say is the best airline in the US. So what have they been doing with their loyalty programs, right? Loyalty programs are a treasure trove of data for companies. They should be designed to drive the kind of behavior that you want. Most companies fail when it's an earn and burn strategy. I'm going to give you points every time you shop. And that doesn't work. I remember for years carrying around like all these little cards on my keychain from the various grocers I would go to. And finally one day I asked the cashier, so what does this do for me exactly? I know my wife told me I needed to use this whenever I come here. That's not a good loyalty strategy, and we're seeing that change today, right? We're seeing Nordstrom completely overhaul their loyalty program. What are they doing? Similar to the airlines, similar to the hotels. Hey, our loyal members, you get to come to the store, you get to meet the designer, you get to have dinner with us, right? It's about experiences. It's not necessarily about the points and discounts anymore. At Huge, we actually test a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. And in particular, I'm going to talk about loyalty. So we actually opened our own coffee shop. Seems kind of weird for an agency to open a coffee shop, but we did about 3 years ago. And we did it for the express purpose of being able to test some of the things that we're talking to retailers about. So whether it's experience, it's wayfinding, specific technology use cases, et cetera. We've called it anonymous loyalty. So the whole point being, what happens today when you sign up for a loyalty program? You get asked for an email or an address or a phone number, whatever the case may be. And we're looking at it differently, saying, how do you build loyalty over time by recognizing the individual? And so I know when you see this, you're going to think, okay, some of this is kind of creepy or a privacy issue, but it's not. You have to find the right use case scenario, right? It's all about how do you operationalize these types of things, but it's based on the idea of people want to be recognized, okay? I want you to know that I'm a valuable customer. I want to be treated special. So for those of you who remember the show Cheers back in the day, you want to go where everybody knows your name. It's like going to your favorite bar and I walk in and it's like, hey man, how's it going? Do you want the usual? That kind of thing. But that's the kind of stuff that we test. And you get the point of what we're trying to get to from a retail perspective. Is how do you use these technologies in service of a better experience? So the notion that you can walk in, not show a punch card or take out an app or a phone and we just recognize you and say, you know what, you've been here 4 days in a week, 4 days in a row, this next one's on us. I mean, that's how you build better experiences over time. And interestingly enough, at lunch, can't remember the gentleman's name I was talking to, but this type of approach of testing, which we'll talk about later, actually gave us a leg up in a project we did with SK2 in a pop-up store we opened for them in Japan, where SK2 has these 5 attributes of how they analyze your skin, and we were actually able to adapt the facial recognition technology to scan your face and identify or recommend the right products based on that skin scan. So really cool stuff. What I want to get to next is kind of where do I see things going? And I think this is the really, really interesting bit when you think about all the stuff that Amazon's doing and Walmart's doing and what same-day delivery, next-day delivery is driving towards. And as a precursor to that, I'm going to talk about voice as the next platform. So this is where we're at today, $2 billion in sales, right? By 2020, if I get my stats, 2022, so again, 5 years from now, 40 billion in voice-activated products. Think about that for a minute. That's beyond an exponential growth in sales. So that is the next platform. And more interestingly is, where does voice typically happen when you're engaging voice? Anyone? Siri in home? Yep. Okay. So it's in home. And so when we look at the top categories of how people are using voice, this is what, about 60% almost. It's groceries, it's content, and electronics. And this stuff is happening in home. So whoever said it over here, right? Because you're generally not out in public and taking out your device and barking orders at it. People are most comfortable using voice prompts and commands when you're in your own home. And we're already conditioned to that, right? Alexa, turn on the TV or turn down the lights or whatever it is. Alexa, I want a pony. It's possible. And so it's really interesting when we think about where voice is going, and we've actually already been conditioned to do this. This game has already started. So these providers, it started with content, right? So it was Apple TV, and then it was streaming Pandora or Spotify, and then Hulu got in the game, and now we've got Google and Alexa and all of the different connected devices. Which, by the way, is one of the biggest things, just as a side note, because I follow this, one of the biggest things that's contributing to Best Buy's success. When you think about all the different IoT devices, where do you go to buy that stuff? You're going to Best Buy is really the only game in town from a merchant of scale that can sell and service this type of stuff. So, in home. And so guess where retailers are trying to go? In your home. So it's no coincidence that Amazon purchased Ring, the doorbell that you're seeing commercials for, right? Because it gives them access to that next frontier of retail. Same thing with Walmart delivering orders, with their employees, and then IKEA buying TaskRabbit to build and assemble the products in your homes. So we've already started going there. with some of these companies, right? We're getting used to ship the products to me in home, I'll try it on, send back what I don't like, and I think it's going to go much further than that. So we saw this at the beginning of the year. Amazon's now delivering products into the trunk of your car. What's significant about this? Because we're going more than just delivering the products, we're now talking about getting into personal spaces, right? That's a very different type of interaction. How long do you think it's going to take for the next evolution of this? They're not only going to deliver the package, they're going to come into your kitchen and put the stuff away, right? It sounds crazy when you think about it, but think of where we are now and how crazy that sounded 5 years ago. What, I'm going to open my door and let some strange delivery person come in and deliver packages? Like, what you talking about, man? Put it on the steps. So, like, this is where we're going. I've got a quote here, and I actually quote this guy a lot, Jesper, from the CEO of IKEA, and their strategy, I mean, he is just very straightforward about what their end goal is. And if you think about it, getting inside the home is the retailer's ultimate data capture story, right? All of that intimate user behavior, and that's what kind of freaks people out now. It happens to me if you're talking and all of a sudden your phone, you know, Siri will be like, I didn't understand what you said, and I'll be like, I wasn't talking to you. Like, so it is about collecting that data in home. So I'm going to switch to one more topic before we wrap up, which is there's something else on the horizon that is going to accelerate what happens in our home and greatly change the types of interaction that we have in our home, and it's 5G. So hopefully all of you have heard about 5G, and it is the next basically mobile protocol in terms of how data moves. So on your phones, your mobile devices, it's 4G today, or 4G LTE. I put this picture here. For those of you who remember this back in the day, it was the jerks driving around in their convertible Beamers. Just kidding. I had to say that. But we've come a long way from this to the evolution that we have today. So we're not going to get into the minutia of this, but you get the idea, right, in terms of kind of how we've progressed generationally. And the things that impacted us was latency and speed. And all that means it's like how fast did it take to download things, and how fast were your device able to communicate a response back from its host, right? So that's where we've been focused. And if we think further out, what's the time frame here? 2020, we're expecting to have 20 billion IoT connected devices. That is tremendous. So take the mobile devices that you have on you today and start to increase that exponentially. Because of the devices that we have in our home, devices that we're putting into stores, so think enabled store associates, think smart mirrors, think about all the things that's going on not only in personal life, but inside these retail environments. There's no way that these devices can actually talk intelligently together, and so that's what's driving this need for 5G, and you're going to start to see that. To give you an example of what that means, we put it in terms of a video download or movie. So currently we're today at 4G. A couple hours to download a movie. It's 3 seconds to download a movie with 5G. Think about that for a second. You're about to go on a plane, you're about to go wherever. It's like, oh, you know what, I need to catch up on the last season of Suits. I can hit a button and I could download the entire thing while I'm boarding this flight. It's about ubiquitous connection. Everywhere you go, you have a level of connectivity that we never imagined. And just to give you terms, in terms of the quantum leap from where we are today, it's literally the equivalent of doing this. And I did this versus all the technical jargon that our team gave us. So it's not just about the connectivity and the speed. It's a new form of connection, and I'm going to talk about what does that mean for us in practical terms. So as I mentioned, we were originally focused on latency and speed. What 5G does is it gets us to edge computing. And what does edge computing mean? It means none of the processing is happening on your device, right? Because the speed is so fast, everything's going to go up to the cloud and back. And when we think about the implications of that, I'm actually going to skip to this one right here. It's tremendous because now we don't have to worry about hardware. We don't have to worry about size, right? And so start thinking about what this means from a retail environment. So I'm in home, and I want to try something on, and we've all seen kind of the Hollywood depiction of this, and we've seen some iterations of this today, the virtual mirror where I can change colors. Imagine smart fabrics, right? Because I don't need to have bulky hardware. So imagine smart fabrics where I'm trying on a garment. It could be a generic garment that we use for any product vendor. It actually takes in the product specs from your brand. And now when I try it on, I can actually feel the physical size constraints. So this garment could actually potentially shrink or expand based on the properties of the garment that we are downloading. So you could be in your home and have a very realistic shopping experience as if you were going to a store and try it on. So that's a lot of where we're exploring right now with the likes of Verizon, with the likes of some of our retail partners to think about how that experience changes. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of data. So just listening to the talks this morning in terms of the lifetime value and how do you think about promotional activity and bounce back and all of those types of things, that's just the tip of the surface. Think about the data implications for what we were just talking about, the amount of data, both structured and unstructured data that will be available, and how retailers are trying to put that in service of an overall experience, either to inform the experience or to learn from the experience. And so I'm going to end with this slide. Neil Gaiman, the author, if you've seen read the book, adults follow paths and children explore. I love this quote. And I kind of use this as a basis when we're working with clients because the way forward is very different than the way we've been doing it. And as retailers and companies that are trying to kind of stay relevant, think differently about the brand, you have to choose a different path. You have to explore what are the right things. And it's not everything isn't right for you, but you have to build a culture and institutionalize a behavior that says we need to think outside the box. We need to think about how we work differently. How do we think differently about the metrics and the KPIs that we use? So a lot of times when we're doing projects and we're doing transformation work, finance will always come in like, these are the 5 KPIs that we want to measure progress against, and which is fine, but pick 3 KPIs that are non-financially driven, because that's the stuff that gets your users more involved in terms of what you're trying to do. So how do you measure overall experience and engagement? And that's some of the interesting things that Nordstrom's doing with their stores, and we're going to see more of that. Same thing with Petco as they play with different services. I can't measure services per se in terms of a sales per square foot metric. So we need to rethink all of those types of things and rethink how we capture data. It sounds a little creepy when we talk about the facial recognition software. At the end of the day, we're actually not capturing your image or likeness. So if you think of the face recognition on your phone that unlocks it on the iPhone, it's creating a profile. What can we start to understand about the profiles in terms of what that's indicating with the users that are interacting with our brands? So that's it for me. Thanks.